Hey, what's up, guys? John here with the second video of the day. I know I'm kind of going off today, but today another one of our friends, Ben, makes it to the channel, and he's playing a game with the white pieces. He opens e4, and black opts for e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4, the Italian game. And black goes bishop to c5, the Gioco piano. And again, we have a video on this already, but my favorite move here is b4, the Evans Gambit. And after bishop captures c3 and then d4 is coming, there is a video on this channel already about the Evans Gambit, so go check it out. Ben, I'm pretty disappointed that you didn't play b4, but and instead you went for castles, which is again a perfectly fine move. And black continue knight to f6. This is all standard theory right here. And this is the first move that's kind of interesting. White goes knight to g5. And knight to g5 is a slight inaccuracy because putting this knight on g5 is just not the best square. Black castles, which is the best move. And white goes for knight captures on f7. This is a big mistake because you're basically giving up two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn. And although the point value is the same, the two minor pieces are definitely better than a rook and a pawn. And this should be actually winning for black, even though the material is technically equal in points. So yeah, just remember, this pawn will always actually... you'll be able to capture it. You'll find it a lot where you can capture with the bishop and then a knight in exchange for a rook and a pawn. And you should never do it. It's not worth it, even though the point value is the same. So now white has to defend this pawn. He goes d3. And black pushes d5. D5 is the best move. And white continues his development with knight to c3. Knight to c3 is great. Also possible is something like bishop to g5. That would probably be... the most precise, but nonetheless, knight to c3 is a really strong move. And here we have d captures on e4. D captures on e4. D captures on e4 with white isn't as strong as if you trade off this knight. If you go knight captures, and then d captures, you've now traded off this knight, and if something like this, now your rook is mobilized. This is the overall good position for white. But Ben opted for d captures on e4, which is still good. But and black continued bishop to g4, just challenging the queen. Captures, and bishop to g5. So now you still do get this good pin on the knight, and this rook's going to be a little weak by itself. We have h6. Just black asks white, what do you want to do with bishop? Do you want to capture the knight, or do you want to retreat? And Ben retreats. Probably better is just bishop captures, and after g captures, this is a better position for white. However, bishop back to h4, and now we have the best move, the most accurate move is probably knight to d4, just putting your knight on this strong outpost, and there's nothing white can really do to push this knight away. But black played g5, just further expanding on the king side, this is an okay move as well. And now we have bishop back to g3, and we have rook to e8. Don't really know what this rook to e8 move accomplishes, but I mean, it doesn't blunder the game, so I guess that's okay. Ben goes h3, and we have bishop to h5. Black wants to keep its diagonal and its strong threshold on the d1 square, so rook to d1 cannot occupy the open file. This is okay, although I believe that something like bishop to d7 is probably better, and if after rook to d1, rook a to d1, you can just play knight to d4, and this closes the open file. But we have bishop to h5, and now what white should do is play something like king to h2, And then after black moves, I don't know, just expands on the queen side, you can push f3 and completely nullify this bishop. You can't push f3 before you move the king because it's pinned. And this will be one of the times f3 is actually good, because he elected to put his bishop on h5, and by playing f3, you kind of force the bishop back to f7 or e8 to get back into the game. And clearly, there's pieces there, so it would just be a long time until that bishop became useful again. Instead, we have knight to d5. This is not good, because you basically let him capture your pawn for free. It's hanging because the knight was guarding it before, and you're once this pawn's gone, this knight isn't very strong. Your bishop's under attack. You probably have to play bishop to h2. It'll be an uncomfortable position. White will be really cramped. Yeah, so instead, king to h2 and then f3 is probably better. But after knight to d5, black actually missed this knight captures on e4 and accepted the trade. This move is still winning for black because he is up material. 2 minor pieces for the rook. And we have e captures on d5. Knight to d4 finally. And now we have rook a to e1, just challenging this pawn. If black pushes it, maybe you can even capture the c7 pawn. Probably better in this situation is still king to h2. Or even something like bishop to h2, just bringing it back. However, he is challenging your c2 pawn, and you want to do something about it. And by playing rook a to e1, you actually invite him to play rook captures on c2. I mean, knight captures on c2. Oh, actually, although this is not that good, because after this, we have rook e to c1, and then once you capture this captures, and then this knight is actually stuck. So you actually, it's not too bad if you allow knight captures on c2. Sorry, I missed that at first. But after rook a to e1, this is a little weird because you're cramping in your rook right here. But I guess now if you allow knight captures on c2, only one of your rook is under attack, and you can actually capture this pawn. But instead, we have bishop to e2. This move is just to pick up the rook. And the best move here, c3, which Ben plays. Props to you for finding c3, because the idea of c3 is if bishop captures the rook, then you can capture this, and the bishop won't have time to retreat because you can capture another minor piece. So that's the problem with these in a line. Black actually goes for this. Bishop captures on f1, and we have c captures on d4, this nice intermediate move before recapturing the bishop. We have e captures on d4, and now you've captured... Sorry, now he get captured with the rook, but probably better is to capture with the king. But the best move in this position, which Ben finds, is rook captures on e8. And he successfully trades off all his pieces, and now he's actually up a pawn after all that. So, good job, Ben. Black goes d3, and we have king to e1. I'm just trying to prevent this pawn from pushing even further. This pawn is actually going to be captured relatively quickly because it's on a light square, and if he pushes it, it's captured, and if he plays something like bishop to e4 to get ready to push it, it'll just be stuck there forever after a3 and b4. So black goes bishop to b4, and we have king to d1. Right here, you could probably play something like d2 and get away with it, but it's probably not worth it. You want to go king to d7. Instead, black goes h5. h5 is like okay, but it's not very strong. It doesn't lose or anything, but it's just a waiting move almost. And it allows white to capture on c7. So now white is actually up a full pawn, and it should be winning. We have 6 pawns to 5. Once these 2 d pawns are traded off, because the kings will gobble them up, the 3 pawns on the king side should overwhelm the 2 pawns. We have king to d7, bishop to e5, and a5, just expanding on the queen side. we have bishop to f6. Just going after this pawn. And we have a g4. We have h captures on g4, h captures on g4, and f3 even. And after captures, now you have this passed pawn. This pawn should win you the game. Black goes a4, and white goes a3. You don't want to allow him to push a3. a3 is a good move. And now you challenge this bishop. Bishop to e7. This is an inaccuracy by black. You cannot afford to trade bishops when you're down so much. When this passed pawn is winning if you trade bishops. And note that this is a dark square, so the bishop should be able to eventually exchange for this pawn. And it'll really be a bishop for a pawn, and then white will have to find a way to win with a dark squared bishop and 2 pawns against 2 pawns, which is slightly harder in my opinion. We have bishop captures on e7, king captures on e7, and king d2. King d6, king captures on d3, king captures on d5, and king to e3. White is completely winning in this position. You have a passed pawn right here, and if the king decides to go here, your passed pawn will queen, and if the king decides to defend this pawn, your king will be able to gobble up his pawns. So we have king to e6, and we have f4. Great move. King to f6, king e4, b5, and we have f5. King to f7, king to e5, king to f8, and after something like f6, f6 isn't the strongest because now you can't actually take the opposition. Instead, you should play king to e6 or even king to f6. You always want your king to be in front of your pawn if possible, so you can take the opposition. Because right now, the players are basically in a zugzwang, or like a standoff, where white needs to put black in a position where white needs to put black in zugzwang basically. And to do that, you put your king in front of the pawn. For example, after king to f6, the black king is forced to move because these pawns cannot. And if he goes to g8, you just have king to e7. And if he goes to e8, then you have king to g7. And now this pawn is guarded all the way. However, instead, white played f6. f6 is still winning because after king to f7, now you can't actually take the opposition because, well, if you play king to f5 and he just goes back to f8, you can never really enter the position. As you'll see, Ben goes king to e6, king e8, and once you play f7, the king can go to f8. And this is still winning for white, keep in mind. You just have to know that this pawn can never promote. And because this pawn can never promote, for example, if you go f6, then it's going to be a draw. The king doesn't have to move anymore. So knowing this pawn can never promote, you have to move your king to gobble up these pawns. And that's the only way to win the game. After captures, or king to c5, king e6, captures, and captures, now this pawn, these 2 connected passed pawns will win you the game. However, after black played king to f8, Ben fell into black's trap and played king to f6, and this is actually a drawn position because the black king has no moves. You're forced to play b4, and now if you move the king, after captures, this is a draw. Or sorry, black would just play this, and now you just capture the pawn, and you cannot get here in time because the king will be able to protect the pawn. For example, king c6, king to e6, king b5, and king d5 captures. You actually guard this pawn, and now the black king is in position to gobble up this pawn, and you're actually going to be losing this game as white. So you cannot play king to f6 because it's a forced stalemate, and the position goes from extremely winning to a tie. But this is exactly what Ben plays. And black goes b4. After a captures on b4, and b3, you're forced to capture this pawn, or else you're gonna lose. So after captures, the black king has no moves to make, and this is actually a stalemate, a draw by no moves left. And this is actually unfortunate. I'm actually going to release a video in the future about how to win some common king pawn king endgames, because seeing games like this where you're up a pawn and you can't push for victory, those are the saddest, because you worked the whole game to win one pawn and you did everything right, but you can't kind of push for victory, which you definitely should be able to do. And I'll come out with that video shortly. So guys, keep submitting the games that you played, and I'll do some analyses. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and see you in the next video. Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry, I forgot one of the most important parts of the video, the meme of the video. So, in spirit of the game that was just played by Ben, who had a pass to F pawn, but and A and B pawns, it's this guy. He's stuck between a decision. What do you go for, the A and B pawns or your passed F pawn? And he can't figure it out, just like our fellow in this game with the white pieces. Ben, you're sweating, man, just like this guy right here. And I hope you make the correct decision next time.